Hello, Will Wolf 76, howling at you. Today I want to talk about how I automated my Draconic Fusion Crafting. Now, it took me about a day to figure out how RF tools work. Luckily, I'm a programmer, so it didn't take me too long to develop this system. The system is very simple, and you can copy my programming code from what I'm going to show you so that you can do your own. The key thing to remember is that you're going to have to change some of the nodes. Like I have a node up here for networking. You got to make sure that you name them properly. But we'll get into all that. First, let me dump these in. We're going to craft 20 Awakened Draconic blocks to show you it working in progress. So as you can see, it's crafting it, no problem. While that's doing that, I want to show you that I have the materials for the next one in here. As it pulls out, you will see the next one pop in. And the reason being, I will get into in a minute. And here I want to also show you how the items will show up here and then disappear. These are all going to be explained in a minute, but I want you to see them before we go. Okay, so as you can see, I created 20 of them. That's 5 recipes since they do 4 at a time. So they work pretty well. Let's go into how this thing works. First, I have a recipe right here with an ME interface. This is set to blocking mode. Well, blocking mode means you do not push crafting items if inventory contains items. If there's anything in this chest, anything at all, it will not send the recipe in. But the minute that all the items are pulled out, it'll push the next set of items in, which that's the last set, so it is done. This one here is another one that I do not have any recipes in, but it's set to blocking mode. This chest up here is to go into the ME system. I have an import bus, accelerators, because I like everything fast. And then this here is it's called a node. This connects to that processor. Now I could have literally put the chest right on top and on the side and had it like that so that I did not need the node, but I didn't want all the stuff. I wanted it more open. So that's why I chose to use a node. There is a way to tell it which node, but if you don't tell it which node, you're telling it it's connected directly to it. I will explain how to do that. But for my tutorial, I'm using a node. So to recap, everything from the ME system that's being made goes into this chest, and eventually when it's done, it will go out through the obsidian chest. Now, to get into the actual program. The actual program will use one space for items and one variable. Okay, so this is the program. First, we have an event. It checks to see if the program is running. If the program is not running, every tick, so every 20 times in 1 second, it'll check to see if it's running. If it's running, it won't do anything. If it isn't running, because this is set to single, then it will start the program. So that's the event that we're using to start. We're using the test and lock. That way, if I have any errors in the program, it will not continue to keep trying to do it over and over again. It'll literally lock up the program. That was for testing purposes. I left this in here. It's good to just keep it in there. It doesn't hurt anything. I named it crafting. You can name it whatever you want, as long as it's the same thing as it's in this one for unlocking. Because if it doesn't reach this point, then it will never run through again. All right, the next operation is count items externally. The reason you're counting items externally, it is counting what is in the chest. I used the node. This node I named, it's on the Dragon channel. I named it ME. To set your processor up to the channel, you type in net setup and then the name of the channel. It found one node. It found that node. So now anytime I access ME, it'll access that node. Now, as I was saying, we were accessing ME on the east side. So we did the east side. And this is for like if you're doing a furnace, the top or the bottom. The top would be the items in the furnace that you want to burn. The bottom would be the items that you are using to burn, like charcoal or coal. We don't need that for most of the items. So that's why you're going to see a /X. So right now we have, it's counting the items inside the chest. The next item will be a test greater than. The perimeters I'm using is the first variable will be the function of the last integer. So it's going back to this last one, this last OP code, which was the count the items in the chest, and it's pulling that number. The second one it's going to compare it to is 0. If that number is greater than 0, then we have items in the chest. That means that we have a recipe that's trying to be crafted. If it's 0, then it doesn't, there's no crafting, then we just have to forget, leave. So as you notice, we have green dots. It's following the green dots in a line. That's what happens. That's the order in which it's doing. But if you have a red dot, that means it's a true and false. So in this case, if it's 0, then it would be false. It will go to this release lock, and then because this has no dots, the program ends. That's the end of the program. One of the ends. You can have multiple ends. In this program, there's only one end because I have it going back into it for a second time. But some programs will have multiple ends. You could tell because it has no green dots for it to go anywhere, or red dots. So when it ends, it cancels itself out. The very next tick, it'll check again and see that it's not running, and it will start back up. So every tick, it'll check to see if there's anything in that chest. If there's something in the chest, then it follows the green dot. And this is where it checks. This is where it's going to do a fetch. It's going to pull what's in the what's to the right of that what's in that chest in slot 0, the top left slot. And that is important. It must be the top left slot. We have nothing in items. It's going to pull the whole stack, and it's going to put it in slot 0 internally in the processor, which is right here. In fact, let me press that, which is right here. So then after it does that, we follow the green dot to push items. Now it's pushing it to the west side of the processor, which is the Fusion Crafting core in slot 0. In the Fusion Crafting, slot 0 is up here, slot 1 is up here. And I know this because I ran a test program that experimented what slot 0 was with an upper slot 0 with the down slot, just slot 0 with nothing, and then slot 1. And I found that slot 1 was always whatever was in here, and slot 0 was always in here. This is a good way of testing out items that you are not sure of. I saved it to a variable, and then I activated the variables 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I could just click this and find out what they were when I was after the program ran. As you can see, this is red because this is being taken up by that slot. Back to that slot. All right, so that is how I figured out what that was. And now what we did was we pulled the first slot from that chest and put it into the crafting core. Now that is important because the first slot is always going to be whatever we're crafting the main ingredient. And I will show you how to set that up in a second when we get to that point. But know that that is what is happening here. Follow the green dot. Now we're here. We're counting the items back in the chest. We're doing a second count in the chest. And the reason we're doing a second count in the chest is because the recipe that we just used as an experimental, which was the Awakened Draconic blocks, if you would have done a count beforehand, you would have had the 4 from this, the 6 from the Draconic cores, and the 1 from the Draconic heart. So now you would have had 11 items. Well, this recipe calls for 7, so you had to take out these 4 to leave in just the 6 Draconic cores and the 1 heart. So now it's counting to see how many items are in there that are going into these fusion injectors. So we're getting that number. Follow the green dot. And now we're setting it to variable 0. That's what this is. It's a set variable, variable 0. Green dot. Now we're going to do a check. We're going to check that the variable 0 is greater than 0. Now the variable 0 should have 7 at that point for this recipe because there was 7 items in there, 6 Draconic cores and a Draconic heart. Because there were 7 items in there, it's going to tell you that there's 7. Now, before I go on, I want to say that there is a loop function. The problem with the loop function is it wasn't working right. No matter what I did, no matter what I put into that, in fact, I'll drag it in here. No matter what I put into here and then it put into here, I could never get it to run the amount of times I wanted to run. I do not know what was hard coded in for this, but because there was never real clear documentation on how any of these work, it was a headache, and I just said, enough's enough. So I created my own loop. As you can see, the dots go this way, down, over, and back up. So this is a loop, and I'm going to explain why it's a loop in a second as we go through it. So right now, it's going to detect that there's more than 0 items in that chest. It should always detect it first. So the first thing it's going to do is going to fetch. Now this fetch and this push are doing the same thing it did up here, only it's doing something a little more specific. Instead of pulling a whole stack, it's only going to pull an amount of 1. And I'm not picking a slot. So it's going to pull the first item in the chest. That's basically going to be the first time I run, it's going to pull the first item in this first slot because the 0 slot's going to already be pulled out. And it's going to put it in slot 0. And the reason we're doing this, we're pulling it one at a time because we want to make sure that this loop only runs the amount of items that are in there and then stops. Because if another recipe is going in there, we don't want it to pull from that recipe. But we want to make sure that we clear out the chest before we continue. So it's pulling one item, and then it's pushing that item into this storage scanner. Now, the way the storage scanner is set up, I have scanned the area, and I have all the Draconic Fusion Crafting injectors starred for being routable. Everything else, I use this button to remove. You click and remove. So only the Draconic Fusion Crafting injectors are on the list here. These, if you notice in the bottom right, it says single item mode active. If you shift right click, you can change that. You want them all to be active so they can only take 1 item at a time. I have a 10th one up here because you can't fit a 10th one in here. The reason that you want them to be like that is a recipe like the one we use as demonstration. There are 6 Draconic cores. If it isn't active, all 6 of these will go into 1 injector. You need to spread out so that it can use it can start the process. So that is why it is set up that way. So we're pushing it into the storage unit, which will automatically put it into the injectors properly. Then when it is done, we go down to here to subtract numbers. The first variable, we're gonna take the variable that's in variable 0, which is in this variable right here. That we set up here, which was the amount of items that were left in the chest. So originally it was 7. This is just a straight integer that we are subtracting 1. So now it's going down to 6. Then we are overwriting that 7 with what we just got, the 6. This is just a wire. So because we couldn't reach it naturally, it is pushing it right back into it. Now it's going to, instead of pulling the 7, because now it's replaced with a 6, it's going to do it. It's going to pull 6 and say, is 6 greater than 0? It is. Then it's going to fetch 1 item, push 1 item, subtract, go 5, save it to 5, and repeat. And it's going to keep on going and looping until it gets down to 0. So all the items will eventually be pulled out. On the last item, it'll pull out the last item, go down to 0, get up to here. Now, is 0 greater than 0? No, it's going to follow the red dot over here to count items external. Except for this one is set up to count the fusion slot, slot 1. This spot right here. It is going to say, hey, are you done with the crafting? Because now that we gotten everything in the crafting set up, it's going to craft and it's now check to see if it's done. So it's counting how many items are in there, because in the case of the Awakened Draconium, there's going to be 4. But the one thing that's always true is that if it's not crafting, it's 0. So we're going to use that constant as a way to test. So We're testing to see if it's 0. We're using the greater than. We're using the function last number that pulls whatever was in the last OP code, which is this one. That was the count. And it was testing, are you greater than 0? If you're not true, you're going to go down. If you're true, you're going to go to the left. So it's going to be not true at first. Then we have a wait command. It's going to wait 20 ticks. The reason being is that I'm a C++ programmer, and I know that anytime you have a program that's looping, you don't want it to loop too fast. It can eat up your processing resources. So you always want to have some sort of wait. I did a whole tick. You can just do 1 tick. That'll be fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really slow it down. But I put in 20 ticks. Then I have a wire going back up into it, and then it's doing another count. And it's going to keep on checking until it's finished crafting. Then when it's finally finished crafting, it's going to go here to fetch item. It's going to fetch item out of slot 1 of the fusion core, and then it's going to push it into the obsidian chest. Which, remember, I have the node set up as the ME. You don't use that if you're directly hooked up to the processor. That'll stay empty. It'll just say that. But because I named the mode ME, and it's the up part, and you right click this, and whatever you named it right here, node, that's what you put in there. So in this case, it's named ME, it's going up, and it's going into obsidian chest, and it's done. So now we finished crafting. The injectors are empty, the core is empty, so it's ready for the next operation. We have a wire going up here to release the lock, and then the program stops. And I will copy this to the description so you can actually take what this is, and when you create yours, all you're going to have to do is edit your inventory spaces. So with that is how the recipe works. Now, the most important part that I haven't gone over is how you set up your recipes in your ME system. And the way you set them up is that we're going to use the awakened core as an example. This is your main ingredient. This has to be first. All this it doesn't matter what order you put in, but the main ingredient has to be first. So you put that first. So that's going to be in the first slot of the chest when you do your crafting. So there's 5 of the awakened draconic, 5 of the wyvern cores. It doesn't matter where you put it in here. Recipe created. We're going to put it in this one right here. Now, as a demonstration to show you that it works, and I'm a fool, I almost did this without this in there. I did make an alteration, so I want to save it. Reset, clear. You don't have to do that all the time. I just like doing that. And now we're going to go in here. Let's pull them all out. We want 5 cores. Oh, we're missing the other stars. We're going to do 4 cores. Yeah, that's what I said, 4 cores. So there's another star filled in. And there's 9 items filled in. And it's crafting. It didn't try to pull a 10th because we did the loop properly. And it counted properly. So it doesn't matter if you have a recipe that's 7 or a recipe that's 9. It will always count it properly. And there it goes. Now, if you ever want to use RFTools for other things, the way I found out that this top part was 0 and this bottom part was 1, I use another program. I created a dummy program real fast, and you can see I had 4 different variables. Variable 0, 1, 2, and 3. This way I can go back and look at what was in the variable and see what it found. So I did an examine item. All these are examine items, but I did different inventory and slots. So the first one I did was the west side, and it was the upper part, like it would in say like a furnace. Then I did this one, which was the down part. Then I did this one, which didn't have anything at all. It was just west, but it was slot 0 still. And then this one said slot 1. And then I threw an item into that top part, and the top part, all 3 of these came up for that item, and they all had slot 0. But this one said error. And then when I ran it again, after running a recipe and not pulling out this item, it told me what that item was. So that's how I knew that slot 1 would always be the bottom and slot 0 would always be the top. This is how you write a code real fast to test, and I called this test fusion. This is how you would test to see if certain variables would be certain things so that you can write adequate code. All right, well, that is how I automated my fusion crafting. I hope this was very beneficial to you. And I look forward to seeing you on my Twitch stream, Will Wolf 76. Howling at you. Take care. Bye.